And we are back for more Fire and Blood. Preston, this is our first Fire and Blood of the new year, and
Fire and Blood, we are back. We are excited. Woo! I mean, this is.
it's a glorious day today. Today is
I
a
know. I know a
glorious
lot of
day.
people. They listen to our other podcasts and they're like, "Yeah, look, this is fine, but we want you to be talking about Ice and Fire. We want you to be talking about Nimble Dick and Pretty Maris and Alardim. That's what the people want." And so we're doing it. We're here with Fire and Blood.
Record. I almost want a camera in your room when you're reading the next book, Winds of Winter, and Alardim just shows up. I just want to see how
Oh my
happy and
God,
giddy
it's
you
gonna be.
get.
I mean, if Alardim shows up, like I would close the book and I'd be like, this is a perfect book. Like, it's done. All right. Oh God, hopefully it'll come this year.
I know. We can only
Okay.
we can only hope. We can only hope. But guys, welcome back. We are continuing Fire and Blood. I know it's been a long time, but every now and then we like to take a pause, and get some other things out of the way like Mando and Raised by Wolves. But now we are back. This time we'll be covering a question of secession,
Right.
and
Which
yeah,
the which the first half of Question of Succession is new stuff, clearly written like closer to the time of when Fire and Blood came out. The latter half is the Rogue Prince, which came out years ago in the I think in Rogues. It was a short story, um, but I'm not so there is a shift in style and tone halfway through because they're written many years apart. The
a
first
lot
and
of
second half.
drama. The second half has a lot of family drama, which I guess
Yeah.
is to be expected because we're setting up the Dance of the Dragons. But it's
But
very keeping up with the Targaryens ish type of thing.
sure, but the other thing as well is the second half focuses more on we're not sure what the truth is. This source says A, this source says B, this source says C. They have this back and forth of Mushroom and Maester Runketer and Septon Eustace, and such. And it's like, well, what really happened was we don't know. Which is how history is. Like if you study a lot of history, especially like old Roman history or something, you can be like, well, Tacitus said that Nero did this, but Suetonius said Nero did that. And the truth is, who knows? It was
Right.
all written down 150 years after it happened, so we have no clue what happened. But this kind of stuff happens all the time, um, when studying history. But the second half, because it was written in 2014 or before 2014, the Rogue Prince, the second half of this, it's in a completely different style as the first half, which was written for Fire and Blood.
So it's a fairly long chapter. Can I start the
Sure,
summary?
sure thing.
So the chapter starts out with a small recap of where we stand with Jaehaerys and the succession of the Iron Throne. Last chapter, Aemon died on Tarth, and Baelon was set to inherit. The problem starts to arise when Jaehaerys is quick to give Baelon the titles that his brother Aemon had, despite the fact that Aemon had a daughter, Rhaenys, who was tied to House Valyrian by marriage, and Baratheon through her mother.
So I need to cut in right here. So the beginning of this is like first time I read this, I was just like, this is ridiculous. Like it's written. I mean, it must be intentional because it's so comically bad in the sense that they're like, it was well established that Jaehaerys that Aemon would inherit from Jaehaerys, you know, because it was well established that Jaehaerys was the male heir, and you're like, what the fuck have we just been reading? Like, what are you talking about? It was well established that Jaehaerys was going to be the heir. Like, what about the whole Dreamfire Rhaena thing and her apparent claim, or the fact that Rhaegar Baratheon specifically tried to put her children on the throne, or the fact that Maegor had like declared Dreamfire Rhaena's daughter Arya as his heir? Like not like well established. Like it's one of the dumbest things. Like the first few pages go on and on about this, about how everyone expected that this person was going to be the heir. No, they didn't. We've just been reading for hundreds of pages that it wasn't.
Well, he even tries to assure us that this is just how Westeros does things, even back when Aegon conquered the Seven Kingdoms. Like,
Yeah.
despite one of his sisters being older, he was chosen to rule.
It's very clear that Targaryens name their successors, but people in Westeros generally expect male, dominated lineage. So, these two things are going against each other. And so, but the succession has never been easy, right? So, I mean, Maegor usurps and then declares all sorts of different people to be king, and none of it works out. And so,
Right, but I think a good chunk of Jaehaerys' storyline that we've seen so far is him trying to somewhat integrate the Valyrian culture into Westerosi society. Like, we had a whole thing about incest and exceptionalism and his need to preserve what makes his family so special, but at the same time, he also wants to, like, ensure that there isn't too much of a divide between the Targaryens and everybody else they want to rule. You gotta adopt some ideas if you're fit in, and I guess this is one of them. The whole passing over
sure.
females for
but
male.
we also have to wonder, like, who's controlling him, and the opinions of the people around him, like Sept and Barth. But of course, this issue of appointment versus male. I forget the actual word, promogen or something with the succession. I'm sure some dorky person can go, well, actually in comments, but like, I'm just going to say male dominated succession. It comes up with in our main story because Aerys has named Viserys the heir, and yet Aegon was alive, little Aegon, son of Rhaegar.
Mm-hmm.
And so Aegon was disinherited in preference of Viserys, which is an interesting thing because according to Westeros law, like, Aegon would be the heir, not Viserys. But Aerys chose Viserys as his heir. So the issue is still, like, in our modern story, like, a problem, so. But
Well, the problem here arises with that in the sense because when Balon eventually dies, because he didn't take over as king, then the question of succession comes, like, right back around, right?
right. I mean, the question of things like, a male born, like, which comes first, like the male of a daughter or the male, the male of a brother, all these different things. And George is trying to make the statement that there was never in history clear established inheritance rules, and these caused problems in the Middle Ages and constant turmoil. And
See,
that
this is
he's
where I
really-
get confused, though. I hate to cut you off. This is where I get
Sure.
confused, though, because, like, for me, the way I always thought is, so let's say you have, Ares and then Rhaegar and then Viserys. So
Mhm.
I always thought that Rhaegar was the heir,
Yes.
and despite any children he had, he was not king yet. And if Rhaegar died, it would automatically go to Viserys because Rhaegar never ascended to the throne. Therefore, it would pass to his brother automatically, not his son.
Yeah, I had. Well, I think it's just not established. There's something similar to what you're talking about actually with the House Stokeworth, with House Stokeworth and Bronn about the deaths of the sisters and the order, and whether or not Lollis would inherit, based on if somebody died first, But it's the real rule is there is no rule. No one knows. Like, for some reason, the Freys seem to pass over their women in inheritance completely, while the Starks do not, and things like that. So, and then there's these issues of, is that person may be the heir, but they're not of age yet. So, would it really be smart to put the entire kingdom in the hands of a child when you need a strong leader to be ruling? So that's the other thing. Like, did Aerys disinherit Aegon because he had a feud with Rhaegar, or did he disinherit Aegon because you can't have the kingdom be in the hands of a baby, so.
Well, this is kind of the point that Jaehaerys tries to make, because it's noted that he didn't make this decision lightly. He did
Right.
speak with the small council, and everyone agreed that it'd be better to let the older, more experienced Balon take over than a younger girl, Rhaenys. But of course, this decision to pass Rhaenys came at a cost. Her husband, I'm probably butchering his name. It's I always say
Oh,
Corlaris.
I say Corlys.
Corlys. Thank you. Corlys
But it doesn't.
Valerion.
Again, doesn't matter. There's no correct pronunciation.
No. The YS always fucks me. It's
Oh,
either
it does. It
is
does.
or
'Cause
is.
people laugh at my pronunciation of Varys because you say
I
Varys.
laugh at your pronunciation
Right.
of Varys.
But here, and I think George says Varys, but George
Oh,
also
that's even
says
worse.
right. I think George says Dothraki. I mean,
That's
like,
worse.
right. Dothraki is ridiculous because like we actually have in our world like an I ending for like Middle Eastern, like in Arabic, an I it means you're from someplace. So like if you want to say I'm American, I'd say Ana Americani or Ana Americi, and so like that. So like this is why we say Iraqi, Irani, Omani, Jordani, like. Well, I guess people say Jordanian, but like Omani and such, Yemeni, that's the ending. The I ending means a person of that place in Arabic. And so when you see like I on the end of Dothraki, you're just like, oh, it's like Arabic, Dothraki. But for some reason, George says Dothraki.
You know what it is? The show fucked me up too with its pronunciations, because some characters called some of the YS characters is and ease, like Corlaris or Calaris.
Right.
So
whatever the case is,
I'm so sorry to the audience. We branch off like this
I
all the
know.
time. I'm so sorry.
Rhaenys the queen who never was.
Pretty much. Her husband was Corlaris Valerion. He resigns his position on the small council as the Grand Admiral, and good Queen Alysanne is furious that Jaehaerys, once again, being kind of sexist here towards his own family, and it's a decision that leads them to being like apart for the next 2 years, but they would later reconcile.
So if you go through all of Targaryen history, I'm going to bring up there are three women that are treated very unfairly. And my only explanation for why they're treated so unfairly is that they must be super, super special with their dragon riding abilities or something. The first is Dreamfire Rhaena. The third is Rhaenyra. But the second is Rhaenys, the queen who never was. She should have inherited. Her children should have inherited. And, she and her children get the shaft in history. But interestingly, people like Daemon Targaryen, the Rogue Prince, are interested in her line. And Rhaenyra is, and things like this. Well, Rhaenyra is forced to marry the gay son of the Rhaenys, the queen who never was. But, I think that if I'm going Maester conspiracy, they think something's up with that line, and they don't want anything to do it. They don't want anyone.
Maester conspiracy, or was it the faith? I remember you.
I think it's both.
Both.
I do think it's both. I think there's evidence of both. I think it's a more of a old town conspiracy of Hightower, faith, and Maesters together. But I think that it's some sort of old town like way of thinking or of Hightower connection, because the Hightowers have power in the faith and the Hightowers have power in the Citadel. So they can push it both ways. But this actually comes pretty quick here, because so around this time there's a lot of change. Considering that Jaehaerys' reign is for so long, all of a sudden people start dying and stuff starts changing over like all at once. So the Grand Maester dies, Queen Alysanne dies in 100 of a wasting sickness, which I brought up about like the wasting sickness of Willem Darry is suspicious. They speak of this great tourney in 98 with so many dragons being there, which makes people think that they started worrying. That all these dragons started appearing. And keep in mind that Rhaenyra is born in 97. 1 year before that tourney. And I do wonder if, with the birth of Rhaenyra, who is probably the most special woman in the history of Westeros other than Daenerys, I wonder if she started causing the dragon eggs to hatch. But so there's a lot that, Rhaenyra's, everybody starts dying. Rhaenyra, born in 97, this huge tourney, and everyone remarks about how many dragons there are. And then, there's this issue of succession, and everyone's like, no, things can't go to the line of Rhaenys, the queen who never was. That's ridiculous, So, eventually we get to a great council. And who is the person who actually convinces Jaehaerys to have a great council? It's his son, Maester Vagon.
Archmaester Vagon.
Archmaester Vagon.
And lest we forget, there's another contender for the throne, kinda. Jaehaerys' son Vagon, who is more interested in books than in ruling, and he's become Archmaester of the Citadel and is summoned to King's Landing. Now, we don't know if Jaehaerys summoned him to just ask for his advice or offer him the throne, but we do know that it was suggested a great council take place to decide the whole matter, considering that both of Jaehaerys' sons, Aemon and Balon, are gone at this point, and both have children, and some of them have their own children, so...
Now, there's one thing I'd like to say about this great council is... So normally with something like democracy in our culture, we're not sure of the result. No one was 100% sure whether it was going to be Biden or Trump. Sometimes there's polling, sometimes there's hints. But so when we hear about democracy, like the Great Council, we think, oh, this sounds really fair. Everybody's coming in to vote. But if you actually read, the decision was never really in doubt. Everyone knew that if you give all of the Westerosi lords a vote, they're gonna vote for Viserys because of the male voting line, and they're gonna overlook Rhaenys and Laenor Velaryon. So when Vagon recommends a great council, he's not really recommending a great council. He's recommending Viserys. So it's one of these things, like the Great Council was not this, it was a foregone conclusion. We knew, everyone knows it's going to be Viserys if you call a Great Council. It's something they call two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. It's democracy, but it's not really fair, is it?
I find it funny how Calaris Valerion tries to sway some of the lords at the meeting with his wealth, but ultimately everyone just votes against him anyways for Viserys, which I guess shows tradition is stronger than gold, especially when women are involved.
Yeah, I mean, there's clear parallel to Euron, but it doesn't work with Corlys like it does with Euron, But I mean, it's just the whole you're talking about the entire fundamental practice of feudalism in which their entire society is built on, and you want to uproot it by choosing a woman or through the woman's line. They weren't going to take that, and so it was ridiculous. They did spend a lot of pages. George did spend a lot of pages talking about Corlys's travels and such. And there's one other little tangent that I forgot that I wanted to mention briefly in my notes here was Ryam Redwine. So this was one of, how we talk about how sometimes when we're reading Fire and Blood, there's a checklist kind of thing, we needed to mention that. So Ryam Redwine, for some reason they mentioned that he was hand, and he was hand very briefly, and he was considered one of the worst hands ever. And they had to include that he was one of the worst hands, and that but we don't know what he did. This was actually a really kind of overlooked thing. He had to shove it in there because it's been mentioned, but he never mentioned why Ryam Redwine was a bad hand. No info at all. It was just I have to put in this little fact. Oh well.
I kind of remember Ryam being mentioned a few times throughout the third book, but was he mentioned in the others as well? I don't really recall.
Yeah, it's just a random thing people say, oh, he was a great knight, but he was one of the worst hands, and it's like a one-off line that somebody says at some point, and it's silly because like no background on anything, on like why he was a bad hand, and we get no. I think Davos says it once. He says Sir Ryam Redwine was the greatest knight of his day and one of the worst hands to ever serve a king. That's it.
I wonder if George has like assistants who like know his books inside and out, and they read this and they're like, "Oh, by the way, you forgot to add like just add this in here, just just to tie it back to the main series." And George is like, "That's right. Thank you for reminding me." I wonder if he has those guys. But no, so the Great Council convenes. All the great and lesser lords of Westeros were welcome, as well as were the maesters and even representatives from the faith. So there's your grand conspiracy there because they're involved now.
Yes.
And of course, this turned into an insane get together, and I kind of love chaos like this. More than 1,000 lords show up, each with their own posse of people.
It's
and
just like the end of season 8. When they call the Great Council.
Pretty much.
Exactly like the end of season 8. Yeah.
It's noted that House Lannister showed up with 300 men, while House Tyrell, just to outdo them, showed up with 500 people. And it got so ridiculous that there were still people showing up even after everything was said and done. And it took them about half a year to just assemble almost everyone who wanted to come.
Yeah.
And this is such a big thing.
They all voted for Bran the Broken.
It's such a big thing that even the Ironborn showed up. And funny enough, Jaehaerys' estranged daughter, Sarah, who fled to Essos and built a sex workers' empire, had a strong claim, but she decided not to press it. But instead, her 3 bastard sons came to the meeting instead. And they convened everybody for 13 days until 2 people were the only choices left. Viserys, and son of Balon, and Laenor, son of Rhaenys. But in the end, they voted to have Viserys as the heir to the Iron Throne by an overwhelming amount. Unfortunately, Rhaenys and her party, they stormed the Capitol and chanted "Stop the Steps." I'm kidding.
And everyone was expecting Q. Everyone was expecting them to like arrest the pedophile ring, and then it just didn't happen.
Preston, it's a part of the plan. Stop.
It's all part of the plan.
It's all part of the plan.
Oh.
Hey, I'm still waiting for Mexico to pay for that wall. Yes. But and with the Great Council convened, it wouldn't be long before the old king passes away, and Viserys I would be crowned. Now, Gildain tells us that his reign was considered the apex of Targaryen power. Not only were there many Targaryen family members just out and about, many of whom were married off to form powerful alliances, but there were more dragons about than ever before, as well as new eggs being produced, though not all the eggs ended up hatching. But it did become a new tradition to put them in the crib with newborn children.
Now, I'd also like to point out a very important thing about the dispute between Laenor Velaryon and Viserys Targaryen. Keep in mind, and it's funny because the proof here they use is twisted. They're like, oh well, Viserys had ridden Balerion the Black Dread. But Laenor has a dragon, but he's still young. And they're like, and he's like, oh well, that's like evidence because Balerion the Black Dread is a bigger dragon, and therefore Viserys would have more a right to the throne. It's one of the dumbest pieces of logic. It's very twisted. You look at it the other way and you go, somebody has a dragon and the other guy doesn't. Viserys' dragon is dead. Balerion the Black Dread dies in 90. This is why I say it's very suspicious, because Balerion the Black Dread dies in
I believe 94, maybe
94. And so he dies in 94. So we're talking about the choosing between a king who has a dragon and a king who doesn't. Viserys does not have a dragon, and they chose him, not the line of Rhaenys, the queen who never was, who does ride a dragon, or Laenor, who rides a dragon, whose sister Laena rides a dragon. This is a whole dragon riding crew that they shafted, and they gave it to the dragonless dude.
And he never
Um,
picks up another dragon ever again. Like he never rides
no,
another one ever
never
again.
rides another dragon again. Yeah.
See, see, at first, see, now it's starting to make sense because at first I could kind of
Yeah.
see where you were coming from with this, but now it's starting to sound a lot more convincing when you start to realize these guys are part of like they're usually a part of or involved in almost every major decision and
Hmm.
are usually like loitering around all these important figures and nobody bats an eye to it, especially when they bring up like certain ideas. It's just kind of whatever. And it kind of reminds me of Littlefinger in a way because nobody sees him as a threat and he's like everyone's friend, and because of that, he can just suggest things here and there and lead people where he wants them to go with this just small little push.
Like I say, it's the decision was never really in doubt. The Great Council's idea was a maester's idea. It was Archmaester Vagon's, who was a bookish guy. Who what kind of weird conspiracies and prophecies he's reading, and in the end, he's essentially saying like, oh, what should we do? We should give the kingship to a guy who has no dragon. Oh, okay.
You're making it sound like the Faith and by some part the Maesters. They're like the secret villains of the story. They're like the Palpatine from the sequel trilogy.
Yes,
Like you think
yes.
it's Kylo and Snoke who's the bad guy. No. It's actually like Palpatine all
Yeah.
along.
I mean, granted, I do wonder how much confirmation bias I have when I go through this, but this is like the Rogue Prince is probably the most suspicious of all of the places where you can find maesters. Like even when you get into the dance, I can make arguments in the dance that the maesters were doing some funny stuff, especially at Storm's End. But like this is really kind of the clearest stuff where you're like, oh God, like there's and actually especially when they well later on when they choose Rhaenyra over Daemon Targaryen and then choose Aegon over Rhaenyra after changing their mind, like it just gets to the point where you're like, oh my God, like you guys are assholes. Like it's so obvious. It's so obvious. Oh, it's well established with the Council of 101, except if Daemon Targaryen is going to be the heir. No. Then it's Rhaenyra. And then, oh, Hightowers, you have a son? Aegon Targaryen? Okay. I guess it's him. Council of 101 back again. They're just, oh, God. Yeah.
Like I said, you're not wrong in asking these questions that maybe the Maesters and Septons have their own little agenda because what almost every
Yeah.
lord in Westeros is tutored by them and they're there for most of their lives, and I find it funny that only a very
Right.
few people kind of question the Maesters'
And
motives.
they're followers of the Faith of the Seven, things like that. Keep in mind that, like, who are the people that, it's all suspicious, who are the people that actually supported Laenor? It's actually the Starks. The Starks, the Blackwoods, all right? Followers of the old gods, people that don't have septons at their ears.
Well, you also have some people from what is it, the Crab Isles, the Bay of Crabs, somewhere
Yeah,
like
but
that.
I think they like worship the great crab or something. I'm not sure if they're we worship the hawk. But they're heavily the Celtigars are heavily connected with the Targaryens. I mean,
Right.
with the Valarians and such. That kind of and then the Baratheons as well, like because of they have different Targaryen connections. So they have different loyalties. But at this point, we know nothing of why House Blackwood or House Stark would be supporting the blacks in this situation, or the proto blacks. These are the houses that the Valarian factions are eventually going to become the blacks.
Well, this chapter really felt like two different stories combined into one, so let's conclude this section as part 1, the question of succession being answered, and we'll continue on with part 2 of chapter 12, where we discuss the reign of Viserys and the early beginnings of the dance.